Today, it is common medical practice to locate an object within a patient before cutting into that patient. X-rays, MRIs, CAT scans, just to name a few. But before any of those, Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone, attempted to use electromagnetism to find the bullet lodged within President James Garfield in order to save his life, or at the very least, to spare him from additional medical-induced agony. I'm Bob Summers, and this is a presidential story. On July 2nd, 1881, James Garfield and two of his four sons were on their way to visit his wife and daughter on his first presidential vacation since taking office 4 months earlier. As they entered the Baltimore and Potomac Railway Station in Washington, D.C., Charles Guiteau approached with a pistol and fired 2 shots. The first shot grazed Garfield's right arm. The second bullet was much more devastating. It entered his back, broke 2 ribs, then lodged itself in the fatty tissue behind his pancreas. As Garfield lay bleeding on the station floor, Guiteau was immediately apprehended. Garfield was transported back to the White House in a horse-drawn ambulance. Garfield's Secretary of War, Robert Todd Lincoln, yes, the son of President Abraham Lincoln, was also at the train station and remembered a doctor who was part of his father's medical team, Dr. Willard Bliss. Bliss's parents definitely wanted to influence their child's career path through the first name he was given at birth, Doctor. Since background checks were not available at this time, there were a few things that Secretary Lincoln didn't know about Bliss, but in hindsight, probably wished he had. Here's a quick list. As a Union field surgeon at the Battle of Bull Run, he fled rather than helping the wounded soldiers. President Lincoln had tapped Bliss to set up a veterans hospital, eventually becoming its superintendent. While running the Armory Square Hospital, he was arrested for accepting a $500 bribe to use a certain inventor's stove within the hospital. Bliss was there with the medical team caring for Lincoln after the assassination, but was sidelined by someone who knew of his work. He took credit anyway. And with this unearned fame, Bliss promoted and sold a fake cancer cure, leading to charges of quackery and a suspended medical license. I share this history to provide some context for Bliss's future actions when caring for President Garfield. But all Secretary Lincoln knew was that Bliss had experience with presidential gunshot wounds, and that might be useful. The first thing Bliss wanted to do was remove the bullet, but first he had to find the bullet. So, with unwashed fingers and unsterilized instruments, Bliss kept probing the open wound to try to locate the bullet. At this time, scientists had already proven that infections were caused by germs. Led by Englishman Dr. Joseph Lister, the namesake of Listerine, doctors were urged to employ antiseptic measures to prevent infections. Bliss, like most doctors of the time to be fair, was not a believer in the science of tiny invisible killers. I think this gives new meaning to the phrase, ignorance is bliss. Not surprisingly, Garfield developed an infection that spread to his bloodstream. Meanwhile, 34-year-old Alexander Graham Bell, already famous for inventing the telephone, was visiting his in-laws in Boston when he heard the news of Garfield's shooting and the hidden bullet. He thought he could use some of his telephone technology to help find that bullet. While Bell was working on his telephone invention, he discovered that moving metal objects toward the telephone receiver generated a noise. Bell developed a way to balance the induction field to clear up that static. Working with his assistant William Tainter and other inventors and experts, Bell was able to assemble a rudimentary metal detector in a few days. Then he made some more refinements to increase the range beyond a couple of inches. Bell wrote to Dr. Bliss to volunteer his services and his invention. Bliss agreed, believing that if it worked, he would be able to get the credit. But Bell would not be able to test his invention on the president immediately. More testing was needed first. Bell fired bullets into wood and sides of beef to test the device, and eventually he tested it on Civil War veterans who still had bullets in them. These tests were not always successful, but the president's condition was worsening. Continued probing had not located the bullet, so the 3-inch deep wound had been widened into a 20-inch long incision that was now oozing pus. Garfield had lost feeling in his feet, had relentless chills, and his fever spiked to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Bliss could no longer wait, so he summoned Bell to the White House. On July 26th, 24 days after the shooting, Bell met with Garfield and was shocked how ashen the president looked. Garfield asked questions about his induction balance device before finally allowing Bell to proceed. And of course, Dr. Bliss wanted to be the one to use the device. The device had a wooden handle, a battery, a condenser, and a telephone receiver. Bell had just added a new condenser to amplify the electrical charge, but unfortunately he didn't set it up properly. This resulted in a lot of noise through the receiver, so Bell could not properly hear if there was metal present. The experiment failed. That night, Bell wrote to his wife, "I feel woefully disappointed and disheartened." But Bell, like any good inventor, did not give up. He went to his Washington, D.C. lab, made adjustments, ran more tests, and tried again. On August 1st, Bell returned to the White House, but this time, Dr. Bliss hampered Bell's efforts. Dr. Bliss believed the bullet was in or near the liver on the right side of the president's torso. Since his reputation depended on him being right, he would not listen to any notions to the contrary. So Dr. Bliss would only allow Bell to use the induction balance device on Garfield's right side. Bell thought he had heard something, but it was not the usual sound of found metal, so he discounted it. But that sound was good enough for Dr. Bliss to tell reporters that he was right. The bullet was on the right side. Bell thought that maybe it was the metal springs in the mattress, even though he had told Bliss to move the president to a mattress without any internal metal structure. The day after his second failure, Bell returned to the White House and discovered that the president had indeed been on a mattress composed of steel wires. Bell went out and obtained the exact same mattress and confirmed that it was indeed the mattress that made the sounds he had heard. Bell wanted to try again, but never had the chance. His wife was in Boston having a difficult pregnancy, so Bell left Washington. Dr. Bliss was okay with that. He had moved on to other ideas. Garfield could not eat, and Bliss knew he needed nutrition. So Bliss mixed a blood and beef extract concoction and pumped it into the president's rectum, knowing full well that only the stomach could process it. Garfield winced through the pain, and not surprisingly, his condition did not improve. By this time, Garfield's weight had dropped from 210 pounds down to 130 pounds. On September 19th, 1881, after 79 agonizing days, President James A. Garfield died of septic blood poisoning, likely caused by Bliss's unsanitary probing of his wounds. Garfield's final words were, "This pain, this pain." When Garfield's body was autopsied, Bliss learned exactly how wrong he was. The bullet was found on the left side of Garfield's torso, not the right, and had already been rendered harmless by a layer of scar tissue. Assassin Charles Guiteau's trial was one of the first high-profile cases to use the not guilty by reason of insanity plea. One of his defenses was that President Garfield died from malpractice. Guiteau is quoted as saying, "The doctors killed Garfield. I just shot him." And as chilling as that statement is, he had a point. Guiteau was convicted anyway and hanged on June 30th, 1882. Doctors then chopped his brain into cubes to search for the source of his madness. They did not find it. Dr. Bliss submitted a bill to Congress for his services rendered, $25,000, or about $700,000 in today's money. Congress, believing he was guilty of malpractice, agreed to pay a quarter of that amount, which Bliss loudly and publicly refused. Bliss continued to practice medicine until his death in 1889. Bell continued working on his induction balance machine, eventually creating a device that was used for decades by battlefield surgeons to painlessly search for hidden bullets in wounded soldiers. Building something that has never existed before is extremely difficult. It takes a lot of trial and error, some setbacks, and hopefully a few incremental improvements along the way. I'm just glad that when Alexander Graham Bell was working on the metal detector, he didn't give up. Although he wasn't able to save President Garfield, he did end up saving a lot of lives. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, please click the like button and subscribe to hear more presidential stories. And please visit POTUS.com to hear more interesting facts about the presidents.